Introduction: The hidden laws that shape every fortune. What if wealth isn't something you chase, sweat for, or win in a lottery, but something you learn to design? We have all met someone who spends 20 minutes hunting for a parking space to save $2, then walks into a supermarket and buys things they never planned to buy. We smile at the irony because we recognize a mirror. We laugh at ourselves because we know the peculiar dance of human financial behavior. We negotiate fiercely over a $10 fee, yet we shrug off thousands of dollars lost to decades of financial inertia. Why do two people earning the exact same salary, living in the same neighborhood, and drinking the exact same brand of morning coffee often end up living entirely different financial lives? One feels perpetually underwater, breathless, and startled by every bill. The other builds a fortress of calm, expanding options, and quiet prosperity. If you ask the average person why this happens, they will point to luck, inheritance, insider knowledge, or a lucky break in the stock market. We love to attribute the financial success of others to mysterious external forces because it lets us off the hook. It comforts us to believe that wealth is a lottery ticket we simply didn't happen to win. This audiobook explores one transformational premise: wealth is not an accident. It is not luck. It is not reserved for a gifted few. Wealth follows discoverable principles. Just as gravity pulls down an apple with absolute impartiality, there are universal, timeless laws governing how people think, act, create value, recognize opportunity, manage emotions, and build enduring prosperity. Throughout this journey, we are going to dismantle the comforting myths that keep people chained to scarcity. We will replace them with a science of wealth. A blend of behavioral psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, and practical economics that you can apply immediately, regardless of where your bank account stands today. Many of us treat budgeting the way most people treat gym memberships. Buying one feels productive enough. We download an app, color coordinate our spending categories for 3 days, feel a surge of righteous discipline, and then abandon it by Thursday afternoon. Why? Because we are trying to fix a mechanical problem with a mechanical tool when the real engine of wealth lives entirely inside our psychology. Money is not merely accumulated. It is attracted, created, multiplied, protected, and stewarded by the kind of person you become. Consider the story of Julian, a master carpenter who spent 20 years crafting exquisite bespoke furniture for clients who gladly paid small fortunes for his work. For the first 10 years of his career, Julian lived from paycheck to paycheck. Every time he received a large commission, he felt an urgent, quiet pressure to spend it, as if money were a hot coal burning his pocket. He bought tools he didn't need, leased a truck he couldn't afford, and lent money to friends who never repaid him. His hands could shape mahogany into poetry, but his mind viewed money as a transient guest rather than a permanent resident. Julian's financial life changed the day he stopped looking at his bank account as a scoreboard and started looking at it as an ecosystem. He realized that money flows toward structure and away from chaos. He didn't suddenly become more talented at woodworking, his talent had always been world-class. Instead, he upgraded his mental operating system. He learned how his brain craved immediate comfort, how scarcity thinking triggered impulsive choices, and how delayed gratification acts as a multiplier of human energy. Within 5 years, Julian didn't just have a thriving workshop, he had built a self-sustaining asset portfolio that gave him absolute freedom of time. Julian's story holds a mirror to our own lives. Most financial struggles are not income problems, they are identity and behavioral problems. When you change how you think about value, service, and risk, your external reality has no choice but to reorganize around your new baseline. Over the next 15 chapters, we are going to explore this architecture of abundance. We will examine why your brain fights against long-term thinking, how to spot golden opportunities hiding in plain sight, how to turn daily habits into compound interest for your mind, and how to build a financial life that outlives you. You will learn how to align your identity with prosperity, free yourself from the exhausting treadmill of comparison, and master the emotional discipline that separates the frantic from the free. This is not a manual for getting rich quick through flashy tricks or risky gambles. This is a masterclass in building a life of permanent, purposeful, and guilt-free abundance. It is designed for the entrepreneur, the employee, the parent, the student, and the dreamer who is tired of feeling like financial peace is always just out of reach. Sit back, pour yourself a cup of coffee, and get ready to look at money, value, and your own potential in a completely new light. The principles are waiting. The science is clear. Let us begin Chapter 1. Prosperity Reflection. Take a moment to write down your earliest memory of money. Was it associated with fear, joy, scarcity, or conflict? How do you think that childhood impression still whispers into your financial choices today? Chapter Summary. Wealth is governed by discoverable, universal principles rather than random luck or special privilege. Financial struggles are rarely income problems, they are behavioral, psychological, and identity problems. Treating money like a transient guest rather than a managed ecosystem keeps people trapped in cycles of spending and stress. Sustainable prosperity requires upgrading your mental operating system and understanding how human psychology drives financial outcomes. This audiobook provides a practical framework blending neuroscience, philosophy, and behavioral economics. Chapter 1: Why Wealth Begins Long Before Money Arrives. We have all met someone who can talk endlessly about the stock market, read 3 financial newspapers a day, and quote interest rates down to the decimal point, yet their own bank account resembles a dry riverbed during a drought. We look at them with quiet bewilderment and wonder how someone who knows so much about money can have so little of it. The disconnect reveals a profound truth that traditional finance textbooks almost always miss. Wealth is not created by the mind that understands arithmetic, it is created by the identity that generates value. Long before a single dollar enters your bank account, an invisible blueprint is drafted in the quiet rooms of your mind. Most people spend their lives frantically trying to remodel the house of their finances by shifting furniture around on the surface. They cut out morning lattes, switch credit cards, or try a new budgeting app, ignoring the fact that the foundation is cracked. They treat the symptoms of scarcity while feeding its roots. To understand why wealth begins long before money arrives, we must first look at how the human brain processes reality. Neuroscience shows us that your brain is a massive filtering mechanism. Every second, millions of bits of sensory information bombard your nervous system. To prevent cognitive overload, a specialized network deep within your brain stem called the reticular activating system acts as a gatekeeper, letting in only what it believes is relevant to your survival and identity. If your core identity is anchored in lack, if your internal narrative whispers that money is hard to keep, that wealth is for other people, or that you are fundamentally unlucky, your brain will diligently filter out opportunities. You can walk past a golden business idea, a lucrative connection, or a chance to solve a valuable market problem, and your mind will render it completely invisible. You aren't missing these opportunities because you lack intelligence, you are missing them because your mental radar is tuned exclusively to the frequency of struggle. Consider Arthur, a dedicated logistics manager who spent 15 years working 60-hour weeks for a mid-sized shipping firm. Arthur was relentlessly hard-working, punctual, and reliable. Yet, every year, he watched younger, seemingly less experienced colleagues get promoted over him, while his own salary crept upward by a meager 3%. Arthur believed his dedication alone should dictate his financial altitude. He viewed his job as a place where time was traded for currency, hour by grueling hour. One evening, exhausted and frustrated, Arthur sat at his kitchen table and stared at a pile of unpaid utility bills. He realized something uncomfortable: he was treating his life like an employee waiting to be noticed, rather than an owner solving a problem. His financial ceiling wasn't being enforced by his boss, it was being enforced by his own definition of his worth. Arthur decided to run an experiment. Instead of waiting for his annual review to ask for a raise, he began studying the operational bottlenecks across the entire shipping network. He mapped out inefficiencies that cost his company thousands of dollars every week. When he presented a streamlined routing framework to upper management, they didn't just give him a raise, they created an entirely new executive logistics division and put him at the head of it. Arthur's income changed, but notice what had to happen first. His thinking had to shift from trading time to creating value. Wealth arrived only after his internal identity expanded to match the scale of his contribution. Many of us negotiate harder over a $10 discount on a retail item than we negotiate with ourselves about wasting 5 years in a stagnant career. We guard our pennies with ferocious anxiety while carelessly leaking our greatest asset, our creative focus, into distractions, complaints, and reactive habits. Why does the human brain prefer the predictable pain of scarcity over the unfamiliar vulnerability of growth? Behavioral economists call this loss aversion coupled with status quo bias. Our evolutionary ancestors survived by conserving energy and avoiding unknown territories where predators lurked. Venturing into wealth creation requires stepping into psychological wilderness. To your primitive brain, financial expansion feels risky because it requires change, and change historically signals danger. This is why so many lottery winners or sudden inheritors find themselves broke within a few years. They manage to acquire the external symbol of wealth without upgrading the internal architecture required to sustain it. Money flows toward those who know how to steward it, and it inevitably leaks away from those whose identity views it as an alien visitor. Building wealth begins by asking a radically honest question: who do I need to become for abundance to feel natural? If you currently view yourself as someone who is perpetually surviving, your actions will subconsciously sabotage any windfall that comes your way. You will find ways to spend unexpected bonuses, self-sabotage business deals, or retreat into safe mediocrity. True financial transformation occurs when your self-concept shifts from a passive consumer of circumstances to an active architect of value. You do not attract what you want, you attract what you are. When your daily habits, thoughts, and emotional resilience align with the reality of an abundant person, the external money stops being a distant mountain peak and starts becoming a natural byproduct of your daily life. Prosperity reflection. Audit your current relationship with value creation. Are you primarily focused on trading your time for hours, or are you actively looking for problems you can solve for others? Write down 3 specific ways you can shift your focus toward value creation this week. Chapter Summary. Wealth is not created by financial arithmetic, but by the identity and value-generating capacity of the individual. The human brain acts as a filter. If your core identity is rooted in scarcity, your mind will unconsciously ignore wealth-building opportunities. Financial struggles often persist because people trade time for money instead of stepping into the role of a problem solver. Evolutionary psychology makes the brain prefer familiar struggle over the vulnerability of financial expansion and growth. External wealth cannot be sustained without first upgrading your internal architecture and self-concept. Chapter 2, Scarcity and Abundance, 2 Invisible Worlds. We have all met someone who lives in a multi-million-dollar home yet checks their bank balance with a look of sheer terror, convinced that financial ruin is hiding around the corner. Conversely, we have met people of modest means who share their last loaf of bread with a stranger, move through their days with unshakable calm, and radiate a quiet confidence that prosperity is always accessible. This paradox reveals a vital secret. Scarcity and abundance are not physical bank balances, they are invisible psychological worlds. 2 people can stand in the exact same economic room, breathe the same air, and experience completely different realities depending on which invisible world they have chosen to inhabit. Most of us assume that our emotional state regarding money is a direct reflection of our financial reality. If our bank account is high, we feel secure. If it dips, we feel panic. But neuroscience tells us that the human brain does not react to objective reality, it reacts to perceived reality. When you live trapped in the psychological world of scarcity, your nervous system remains stuck in a chronic state of low-grade survival mode. The amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center, floods your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline at the mere sight of a bill. In this state of metabolic emergency, your higher-order cognitive functions shut down. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for long-term planning, creative problem-solving, and strategic investing, goes offline. You literally lose your biological capacity to make smart financial decisions because your brain is too busy preparing to run from a tiger. Consider Beatrice, a talented freelance graphic designer who earned a very comfortable living yet lived in a perpetual state of financial panic. Even when her business accounts were flush with cash, Beatrice would lie awake at night calculating worst-case scenarios. She hoarded every client contract, refused to invest in software upgrades that could save her hours of work, and turned down lucrative collaborative projects because she viewed every other designer as an enemy trying to steal her portion of a shrinking pie. Beatrice's scarcity mindset became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because she was terrified of spending money to grow her business, her skills stagnated. Because she hoarded her time and energy out of fear, her client relationships soured. She was working twice as hard for half the reward, trapped on a treadmill built entirely out of her own assumptions. The turning point came when Beatrice attended a workshop where the speaker challenged the room with a simple paradigm shift: scarcity assumes there is a fixed pie and your gain is someone else's loss. Abundance understands that wealth is not mined, it is generated. Beatrice realized she was treating money like a finite pile of sand that would eventually run out if she let a single grain slip through her fingers. She began practicing a deliberate shift in her cognitive habits. Instead of asking, "How do I protect what little I have?" she started asking, "How can I create more value so the pie gets larger for everyone?" She invested in advanced design courses, hired an assistant to handle administrative tasks, and started mentoring younger designers in her community. Within 2 years, Beatrice's income tripled, not because the economic landscape of her industry magically improved, but because she moved out of the prison of scarcity and into the workshop of abundance. Why is it so easy for the human mind to default to scarcity? Behavioral economists point to our evolutionary wiring. For most of human history, resources were genuinely scarce. Food, shelter, and safety were hard-won and easily lost. Our ancestors who worried excessively about running out of supplies survived. Those who assumed the universe would provide often did not pass on their genes. We are the anxious descendants of warriors. However, the modern economic world is fundamentally different. We no longer live in a zero-sum tribal hunting ground where every berry eaten by your neighbor is a berry denied to your children. We live in a global, interconnected exchange economy where wealth is created through innovation, problem-solving, collaboration, and service. When you solve a problem for millions of people, society rewards you with a fraction of the value you created. Yet, despite living in an era of unprecedented productivity, millions of people walk around with a Stone Age scarcity operating system running in the background of their minds. How do you know if you are operating from the world of scarcity or the world of abundance? Scarcity sounds like internal chatter such as, "If they win, I lose, there's never enough, I have to do everything myself because nobody else can be trusted," or "Wealth is reserved for the lucky and connected." It manifests as physical tightness in the chest when spending money, even on investments that improve your life or business. Abundance, on the other hand, sounds like, "How can we make this work for everyone? There are always new problems to solve, my success does not diminish yours," and "Money is a tool for flourishing, not a shield against fear." Shifting from one world to the other does not happen by positive affirmation alone. You cannot simply whisper, "I am abundant," while your bank account is overdrawn and trick your nervous system into peace. True psychological transition requires behavioral evidence. You retrain your brain by making small, deliberate choices that prove to your subconscious mind that you are capable of generating value and handling resources with grace. When you catch yourself panicking over a financial fluctuation, pause. Take a slow, deep breath to reset your nervous system. Ask yourself whether your reaction is driven by present-moment reality or ancestral anxiety. Remind yourself that your capacity to think creatively, serve others, and generate income is an infinite resource that no economic downturn can ever take away from you. When you change your internal world from scarcity to abundance, your external choices transform. You stop hoarding and start investing. You stop competing in fear and start collaborating with confidence. And most importantly, you realize that true wealth is not something you have to defend against a hostile world, it is something you express through a generous, capable spirit. Prosperity reflection. Identify one area in your financial life where you currently feel a sense of scarcity or panic, e.g., spending money on your education, investing in your business, or paying bills. Write down the underlying fear driving that panic. Now, rewrite that belief through the lens of abundance and value creation. What action would you take today if you truly believed resources were expandable? Chapter Summary. Scarcity and abundance are invisible psychological worlds rather than mere bank balances. Operating from a scarcity mindset triggers the brain's survival alarm, shutting down the prefrontal cortex and impairing strategic decision-making. Evolutionary wiring makes humans prone to scarcity thinking because our ancestors survived by treating resources as fixed and limited. Modern wealth is created through innovation, collaboration, and problem-solving in a non-zero-sum exchange economy. Transitioning to an abundance mindset requires calming your nervous system and Chapter 3, The Identity That Attracts Prosperity. We have all met someone who undergoes a sudden financial windfall, whether through an inheritance, a corporate bonus, or a lucky investment, only to watch their bank account bleed back down to its familiar baseline within a shockingly short period. We shake our heads and mutter that money burns a hole in their pocket. But what we are actually witnessing is the relentless gravity of identity at work. A person's financial reality will always snap back to match their self-image. Just as a thermostat regulates the temperature of a room regardless of whether you open a window to let in a cold breeze, your psychological thermostat regulates your net worth. If your internal thermostat is set to survival mode, any influx of cash will trigger a subconscious compulsion to get rid of it. You will find unconscious ways to spend, lend, or mismanage the money until your bank balance matches the quiet story you tell yourself about who you are. To build lasting wealth, you cannot simply focus on acquiring assets, you must consciously redesign the identity that holds those assets together. Consider Devin, a talented software engineer who jumped from project to project, never holding on to more than a few $1,000s at any given time. Whenever Devin landed a lucrative freelance contract, a strange anxiety would take over. He felt like an imposter in his own success. Within weeks of getting paid, he would justify purchasing expensive gadgets, treating large groups of acquaintances to dinners, or making speculative trades on volatile assets that he didn't understand. By the end of the month, he was back to stressing over rent. Devin believed his problem was a lack of discipline. He tried strict budgeting spreadsheets, color-coded spending limits, and willpower exercises, yet every attempt at restraint ended in rebellious overspending. Why? Because willpower is a finite emotional muscle that cannot permanently defeat a deeply ingrained identity. Devin's internal narrative was rooted in the belief that he was fundamentally bad with money, a chaotic creator who was destined to live on financial life support. The breakthrough came when a mentor asked Devin a disarming question: if a wealthy, financially secure person walked into your shoes today, how would they handle this contract? Devin realized he had been trying to fix his financial plumbing while ignoring the fact that his identity was leaking at the seams. He stopped focusing exclusively on how to restrict his spending and began examining how a financially sovereign person thinks, carries themselves, and makes decisions. He shifted his self-talk from, "I am trying to save money," to, "I am a disciplined steward of capital." When Devin's next major payout arrived, he didn't rely on white-knuckled willpower. Instead, he automatically routed a fixed percentage into productive assets before looking at the rest. He began reading biographies of master builders not for financial tips, but to absorb their mental composure. Within 3 years, Devin's net worth multiplied tenfold. Not because his technical skills suddenly improved, but because his internal thermostat had been permanently recalibrated. Why does identity exert such a powerful grip on our financial outcomes? Neuroscience reveals that the human brain relies on identity as a cognitive energy-saving device. Making millions of microdecisions every day would overwhelm your neurological system. To prevent burnout, your brain automates your behavior by aligning it with your core self-concept. If you believe you are a person who always struggles, your brain will effortlessly generate habits that fulfill that prophecy. Behavioral psychologists call this cognitive consistency. We have a profound, driving psychological need to act in alignment with how we perceive ourselves. If there is a mismatch between your identity and your bank account, such as a person with a struggling artist identity suddenly sitting on $100,000, your brain experiences cognitive dissonance. It feels deeply uncomfortable, anxious, and unnatural. To relieve that tension, your subconscious mind will sabotage your success just to restore internal harmony. This explains why many people sabotage promotions, ruin profitable business partnerships, or squander inheritances. They are not self-destructive because they hate money, they are self-destructive because they are desperately trying to return to the psychological safety of a familiar identity, even if that identity is painful. Transforming your financial identity does not require a dramatic overnight reinvention. It is built through the accumulation of tiny, consistent proofs. Every time you make a decision that aligns with the person you want to become, whether it is reviewing your accounts with calm curiosity instead of dread, investing in your education instead of impulse shopping, or pausing before an emotional purchase, you cast a vote for your new identity. Imagine two gardeners. The first gardener focuses entirely on pulling weeds every single day, complaining about the stubborn roots and cursing the soil. The second gardener focuses on planting magnificent seeds, nourishing the earth, and trusting the natural laws of growth. The second gardener wins not because they fight the weeds, but because they crowd them out with vitality. When you focus on upgrading your identity, the old habits of scarcity and financial chaos simply get crowded out by a higher standard of living. You stop asking, "Can I afford this?" and start asking, "Does this investment serve the vision of the person I am becoming?" Wealth stops being an elusive prize you chase across a finish line. It becomes the natural reflection of who you are when nobody is watching. Prosperity reflection. Complete this sentence in your journal. Deep down, my financial identity tells me that people like me. Notice if your completion is rooted in limitation or possibility. Now, rewrite that sentence from the perspective of an abundant, highly capable wealth steward. Read your new statement aloud every morning this week. Chapter Summary. Your financial reality will always snap back to match your self-image, much like a thermostat regulates room temperature. Willpower alone cannot defeat an identity rooted in financial chaos or scarcity. Identity dictates behavior. The brain craves cognitive consistency and will unconsciously sabotage windfalls if a large bank account conflicts with a struggling self-concept. Shifting your financial identity is achieved by casting daily microvotes through intentional choices rather than relying on forced restriction. True prosperity is an outward reflection of a calibrated internal thermostat and an upgraded. Chapter 4. Your mind is your greatest financial asset. We have all met someone who can turn a modest garage workshop into a thriving global enterprise using little more than a telephone, relentless resourcefulness, and unshakable clarity. Conversely, we have all witnessed individuals inherit fortunes, secure prime real estate, or land high-paying executive positions, only to watch their advantages dissolve into thin air because their mental infrastructure could not support the weight of what they held. This stark contrast highlights an undeniable economic reality: your mind is your absolute greatest financial asset. Traditional finance places an overwhelming emphasis on external capital. Stocks, bonds, real estate portfolios, and liquid cash. While these are certainly tools of prosperity, they are secondary effects. They are the fruit, not the root. The true engine of wealth generation is cognitive capital, the clarity of your thinking, the flexibility of your attention, the quality of your emotional regulation, and your capacity to solve complex problems under pressure. Consider Leonard, a seasoned commercial real estate broker who lost everything during a severe market downtown. Overnight, his commissions vanished, his property portfolio depreciated past the point of leverage, and he found himself staring at crippling debts. Most of his peers panicked, liquidating assets at fire sale prices or sinking into deep despair while waiting for government bailouts or market miracles. Leonard, however, understood that while his physical capital had evaporated, his cognitive capital remained entirely intact. He didn't waste energy mourning his lost buildings. Instead, he sat down with a blank notepad and asked himself a fundamentally different question: where is the new friction in the market, and how can I solve it? He realized that while commercial office spaces were crashing, thousands of small business owners were desperately struggling to break long-term leases and transition into flexible, decentralized hybrid workspaces. Landlords were paralyzed by the legal complexity of the shift. Leonard spent 3 weeks drafting a master framework for flexible lease restructuring, a completely new advisory service that didn't require him to own a single square foot of brick and mortar. Within 6 months, Leonard's new advisory firm was generating more revenue than his old brokerage ever had. He hadn't recovered his lost real estate, he had deployed his mind to create an entirely new stream of value from scratch. Why do so many people neglect their cognitive capital while obsessing over minor portfolio fluctuations? Behavioral economists call this the tangibility bias. We can see, touch, and count money in a bank account, so our brains treat it as real wealth. But we struggle to measure the value of a sharpened mind, an expanded skill set, or a disciplined attention span. Yet, History shows that individuals who invest aggressively in their own mental acuity can lose every material possession they own and rebuild it within a few years. Conversely, those who inherit millions without developing their cognitive capacity almost invariably slide back into poverty. Your mind processes financial reality through two primary filters: attention and adaptability. Attention is your currency of focus. In the modern economy, distraction is heavily monetized. Every app, notification, and headline competes to siphon away your mental bandwidth. If your attention is scattered across 100 trivial worries, complaints, and micro-indignities, you have nothing left to invest in deep strategic thinking. Wealth creation requires periods of unbroken cognitive depth. The ability to sit with a complex problem long enough for creative solutions to emerge. Adaptability is your resistance to cognitive rigidity. Scarcity thinking makes the mind brittle. When economic conditions shift, a rigid mindset snaps under pressure, treating every change as a crisis. An abundant mindset, driven by cognitive flexibility, treats change as an invitation to innovate. Think of your brain as the ultimate compounding account. Every book you read, every skill you master, every emotional trigger you successfully decode, and every complex framework you study adds compound interest to your intellectual capital. $1 invested in the stock market might yield a healthy return over a decade, but $1, and an hour, invested in expanding your mental operating system yields exponential returns across every domain of your life. When you treat your mind as your primary asset, your relationship with money transforms. You stop viewing spending on your education, coaching, or personal growth as an expense to be minimized. You recognize it as the highest leverage investment available. Wealth stops being something you chase out there in the cold market and starts becoming an overflow of the clarity, creativity, and resilience cultivated right between your ears. Prosperity reflection. Audit how you invest your mental bandwidth this week. What percentage of your daily focus goes toward reactive worrying, entertainment, or trivia versus deep problem solving, skill development, and strategic thinking? Write down one boundary you can set today to protect your cognitive capital from digital clutter. Chapter Summary. External capital like cash and real estate are secondary effects. Your mind is your greatest and most enduring financial asset. Cognitive capital encompasses your clarity of thinking, attention span, problem-solving capacity, and emotional regulation. Tangibility bias causes people to obsess over physical bank balances while neglecting the mental engine that generates wealth. Attention and adaptability act as the primary filters through which your brain processes economic reality and navigates market shifts. Investing time and resources into expanding your mental operating system yields exponential. Chapter 5, Thought alone never built a fortune. We have all met someone who can spend hours enthusiastically outlining grand business schemes, talking about the millions they plan to make, and visualizing their dream mansion down to the color of the front door, yet they have never actually launched a product, sent an invoice, or risked a single dollar of capital. We listen to their grand blueprints with polite skepticism, recognizing the unmistakable scent of all talk and no execution. This disconnect highlights a dangerous cultural myth, the idea that thinking, dreaming, and manifesting alone are enough to summon wealth into existence. For decades, popular self-help culture has romanticized the notion that if you just visualize success hard enough, the universe will rearrange itself to drop riches in your lap. People are told to write down million-dollar checks to themselves, create elaborate vision boards, and wait for abundance to materialize. But neuroscience and practical economics tell a very different story. Thought without execution is merely entertainment. Consider Marcus, a passionate culinary artist who spent 3 years perfecting the recipe for a revolutionary artisanal hot sauce. Marcus possessed an extraordinary palate and a vivid imagination. Every night after his restaurant shift, he would sit at his kitchen table sketching out packaging designs, imagining his sauces on supermarket shelves across the country, and daydreaming about the day he could quit his job. He felt a warm rush of accomplishment just from thinking about it. In fact, his brain released the exact same dopamine hits from daydreaming about success as it would have from actually achieving it. That neurological quirk was Marcus's trap. Because his brain experienced the emotional reward of success up front through pure fantasy, he lacked the restless drive required to face the grueling reality of production. 2 years passed, and Marcus's million-dollar empire remained trapped inside his notebook. He had thousands of brilliant thoughts, 0 bottles sold, and mounting credit card debt. The turning point came when a pragmatic friend walked into Marcus's kitchen, tasted the sauce, and asked a blunt question. "Marcus, are you building a business, or are you just running a very elaborate daydream simulator?" Stung by the truth, Marcus realized he had been using visualization as an escape hatch from the fear of rejection and execution. He stopped sketching dream logos and started renting a commercial kitchen on weekends. He bottled his first 50 units by hand, walked into local neighborhood markets, and offered them directly to skeptical store managers. He faced rejection, revised his labels, tweaked his pricing, and absorbed hard market feedback. Within 3 years, that humble weekend hustle scaled into a nationally distributed brand. Marcus didn't succeed because he thought hard, he succeeded because he converted his thoughts into relentless, disciplined friction with reality. Why does the human brain prefer fantasizing over executing? Neuroscientists call this cognitive closure substitution. Dreaming about a goal gives you the psychological sensation of progress without demanding the metabolic energy or emotional risk of failure. When you imagine yourself wealthy, successful, and admired, your nervous system relaxes as if the goal has already been won. But the marketplace does not pay you for your daydreams, it pays you for your friction, for the problems you solve, the logistics you untangle, and the value you deliver to living, breathing human beings. Behavioral psychologists distinguish between 2 modes of mental processing, mental elaboration and implementation intention. Mental elaboration is what Marcus was doing, drifting into pleasant fantasies about the end result. Implementation intention is the science of bridging thought and reality. It is the disciplined act of mapping out exact triggers, timelines, and immediate behavioral steps. When X happens, I will execute Y. Wealth is the residue of thousands of unglamorous, friction-filled actions executed consistently over time. It is the phone call you didn't want to make, the prototype you rebuilt for the 4th time, the budget you audited when you wanted to look away, and the difficult negotiation you entered with a calm pulse. When you honor the gap between thought and action, your entire financial posture changes. You stop waiting for inspiration to strike before you work. You stop using education and planning as socially acceptable forms of procrastination. You realize that a mediocre plan executed with fierce consistency will always crush a brilliant plan that remains trapped in a notebook. Thoughts are the architectural blueprints, but action is the mortar, stone, and sweat. When you combine clear, visionary thinking with relentless, grounded execution, you stop wishing for wealth and start engineering it. Prosperity reflection. Identify one wealth-building project, business idea, or financial habit you have been thinking about or planning for months without taking concrete action. What is the fear or discomfort hiding behind your hesitation? Write down one small, irreversible step you will take today to force that thought out of your head and into reality. Chapter Summary. Popular culture often romanticizes visualization, but thought alone cannot generate wealth without disciplined execution. Daydreaming about success triggers dopamine releases that trick the brain into feeling accomplished, fostering chronic procrastination. The marketplace compensates you for friction, problem solving, and value delivery, not for private fantasies. Implementation intentions, mapping out exact behavioral triggers and steps, bridge the gap between abstract thought and real-world results. A mediocre plan executed with fierce consistency will always outperform a brilliant strategy that remains trapped as. Chapter 6, Creating Extraordinary Value. We have all met someone who spends years complaining that the economy is unfair, that wages are stagnant, and that the system is rigged against the hardworking individual, yet they perform their daily work with a resentful, bare minimum attitude. We watch them coast through their professional hours, counting down the minutes until payday, while wondering why their financial altitude never changes. This friction exposes a foundational economic law that separates the perpetually frustrated from the permanently prosperous. Wealth is never extracted from the world, it is always generated in direct proportion to the extraordinary value you create for others. Traditional thinking views money as a fixed pile of gold that people fight over, a zero-sum game where one person's gain requires another's loss. If that were true, getting rich would mean taking something away from someone else. But the modern exchange economy operates on an entirely different principle. Money is simply a physical receipt for value delivered. When you buy a cup of coffee, a smartphone, or a book, you hand over your hard-earned cash willingly because you perceive the value you receive as greater than the money you let go of. Both parties walk away richer in utility. Consider Selena, a customer support representative for a mid-sized software company who handled hundreds of frustrated client complaints every week. Most of her colleagues viewed their jobs as a grueling exercise in emotional endurance. They answered tickets mechanically, read from rigid scripts, and couldn't wait to clock out. Selena, however, viewed her role through the lens of value creation. She noticed that thousands of customers were stumbling over the exact same 3 onboarding hurdles, resulting in massive churn and high anxiety. Instead of merely answering individual tickets, Selena spent her evenings writing a series of clear, humorous, step-by-step visual guides and short video tutorials that preemptively solved those problems. She handed them to her manager free of charge. Within a month, customer churn dropped by 20%, and client satisfaction scores soared. Management didn't just promote Selena, they created an entirely new department for customer success education and put her at the wheel, doubling her salary overnight. Selena didn't get richer by demanding more from a reluctant company, she got richer by radically expanding the surface area of her value creation. Why do so many people struggle to see this connection? Behavioral economists call this the entitlement trap. It is the unconscious belief that compensation should be tied strictly to time spent or physical presence, rather than the scale and scarcity of the problem solved. Society does not pay you because you showed up and breathed air for 8 hours, society pays you in exact proportion to how difficult your problem-solving capacity is to replace. If you solve a problem that affects a handful of people locally, your economic reward will reflect that local scope. If you develop a skill, a product, or a service that solves a complex, painful problem for thousands or millions of people globally, wealth flows toward you with the predictable force of a tide. Creating extraordinary value requires shifting your focus from, what can I get from this transaction, to, how can I make this experience undeniably, disproportionately valuable for the other person. When a restaurant owner serves a meal so exquisite that customers talk about it for weeks, they aren't just selling food, they are selling an emotional experience. When a freelancer delivers a project 2 days early with unexpected bonus insights that save their client thousands of dollars, they aren't just trading hours, they are building a legendary reputation that makes future marketing obsolete. Value creation is the ultimate antidote to financial anxiety. When you focus intensely on becoming a master of value, on sharpening your skills, anticipating hidden friction, and serving others with creativity and generosity, you render yourself recession-proof. You stop worrying about economic downturns because you know with absolute certainty that wherever there are human beings, there are problems waiting to be solved. Wealth stops being an elusive prize you chase through speculation or luck. It becomes the natural, unavoidable echo of value sent out into the world. Prosperity reflection. Examine your current primary source of income. What specific problems are you solving for your employer, clients, or customers? Now, ask yourself, how could I increase the value of what I deliver by 10% this week without anyone asking me to do so? Write down one concrete upgrade you can implement immediately. Chapter Summary. Wealth is never extracted or won through a zero-sum game. It is generated in direct proportion to the extraordinary value you create for others. Money is simply a physical receipt for value delivered and voluntarily exchanged between parties who both benefit. The entitlement trap causes people to incorrectly tie financial compensation to time spent rather than the scarcity and scale of the problem solved. Society rewards you based on how difficult your problem-solving capacity is to replace, not simply for your physical presence. Focusing relentlessly on delivering disproportionate value makes you recession-proof and turns prosperity into an inevitable byproduct of your. Chapter 7, Opportunity Hides in Plain Sight. We have all met someone who spends years waiting for the stars to align, convinced that all the good business ideas have already been taken, that the economy is too saturated, and that true opportunities are reserved for insiders with venture capital and elite connections. They sit on the sidelines of life, shaking their heads at modern success stories while muttering that lightning never strikes twice for ordinary people. This skepticism reveals a profound misconception about how opportunity actually behaves. Opportunity is rarely a rare, glittering gemstone sitting openly on a velvet cushion. It is almost always disguised as an inconvenience, a common frustration, an unpolished inefficiency, or an everyday annoyance that everyone else has simply learned to tolerate. Most people walk past fortunes every single day because they are looking for grand, theatrical breakthroughs while ignoring the quiet friction hiding right in front of them. Consider Toby, a former regional delivery driver who spent his days navigating chaotic urban traffic, dodging misplaced packages, and listening to small business owners complain about how difficult and expensive it was to ship fragile, custom goods across the city without damage. For 3 years, Toby felt the exact same daily frustrations as his coworkers. He cursed the potholes, sighed at the lost paperwork, and grumbled about the traffic lights. The turning point came when Toby stopped treating his frustrations as background noise and started treating them as market research. He asked himself a simple, transformative question: what is the most annoying, universally accepted headache in this industry that everyone just assumes is impossible to fix? He realized that local bakeries, florists, and ceramic artists were losing thousands of dollars every month because standard courier services threw fragile boxes around like sacks of flour. They needed climate-controlled, ultra-secure, white-glove transport, but existing logistics giants only cared about massive bulk shipments. Toby didn't have a business degree, venture capital, or wealthy investors. What he had was acute observation. He took his modest savings, bought a used van, padded the interior with custom shock-absorbing shelving, and launched a hyper-niche delivery service specifically for delicate, high-value local artisans. He didn't invent a new technology, he simply paid attention to a problem that everyone else was too busy complaining about to solve. Within 3 years, Toby's microfleet of vans was servicing every major artisan in the region, and larger logistics firms were actively courting him for a buyout. Why do so many people remain blind to the opportunities hiding in plain sight? Behavioral psychologists call this cognitive habituation. The human brain is an efficient machine designed to filter out familiar stimuli so you don't get overwhelmed by your environment. If you take the same route to work every day, pass the same broken processes, and experience the same daily annoyances, your brain eventually stops registering them as problems. It categorizes them as just the way things are. Scarcity thinking reinforces this blindness. When you operate from a belief that resources are limited and the world is crowded, your mind assumes that every good idea has already been claimed by someone smarter or richer. You look at a crowded market and see a closed door, whereas an abundance mindset looks at a crowded market and sees widespread inefficiency waiting to be disrupted. Opportunity doesn't require inventing something entirely foreign to human experience. Look closely at any thriving modern enterprise, and you will almost always find someone who simply looked at a common, everyday annoyance: long lines, confusing paperwork, slow communication, or poor quality, and decided to make it frictionless. How do you train your mind to spot these hidden opportunities? You cultivate the habit of radical curiosity and active observation. Become an anthropologist in your own life. Start keeping an annoyance journal. Every time you catch yourself or someone around you complaining about a tedious process, a poorly designed product, a lack of clear information, or a frustrating service experience, write it down. Do not judge it or dismiss it. Simply collect the friction. When you accumulate dozens of everyday grievances, patterns begin to emerge. You will realize that complaints are not just emotional venting, they are loud, neon signs pointing directly to unmet market demand. Wealth does not belong to the person who shouts the loudest or wishes the hardest. It belongs to the person who develops the eyes to see what others overlook, and the courage to build a bridge over the friction. Prosperity reflection. Start an annoyance journal for the next 3 days. Write down every minor daily inconvenience, slow process, or frustrating service you encounter. At the end of the 3 days, review your list and select the single most common frustration. Ask yourself, how could I solve or simplify this problem for myself and others? Chapter summary. Opportunities are rarely hidden behind locked doors, they are usually disguised as everyday inconveniences and unpolished inefficiencies. Cognitive habituation causes the human brain to filter out familiar annoyances, categorizing them as just the way things are. Scarcity thinking views crowded markets as closed doors, whereas an abundance mindset sees them as breeding grounds for operational inefficiency. Keeping an annoyance journal helps train your mind to spot hidden market demand by treating daily complaints as valuable data. Lasting wealth flows to those who develop the observation skills to identify friction and the initiative. Chapter 8, The Emotional Habits of Financial Freedom. We have all met someone who boasts an impressive intellectual understanding of money. They can explain complex tax codes, recite portfolio diversification strategies, and analyze macroeconomic trends with surgical precision, yet their financial life is a theater of emotional chaos. The moment the stock market dips by a fraction of a percent or an unexpected car repair bill arrives, they panic, make impulsive decisions, and undo years of careful saving in a single afternoon of high anxiety. This dramatic disconnect reveals a profound truth that traditional finance often ignores. Financial freedom is far less a test of math and far more a masterclass in emotional regulation. You can possess all the technical knowledge in the world, but if your nervous system is easily hijacked by fear, impatience, greed, or pride, your emotions will systematically sabotage your financial architecture. Money is one of the most emotionally charged subjects in human existence because it touches our deepest primal needs for survival, status, safety, and self-worth. Consider Valerie, a brilliant corporate attorney who earned a substantial income and read financial journals religiously. Valerie knew every rule of intelligent asset allocation. Yet, whenever a market correction occurred, her emotional baseline collapsed. Watching her retirement accounts fluctuate downward triggered a visceral wave of panic. Convinced she was about to lose everything, she would override her own rational strategy, sell her investments at the absolute bottom, and retreat into cash, locking in heavy losses. Months later, when the market rebounded, FOMO, the fear of missing out, would grip her, and she would buy back in at the peak. Valerie was trapped on an emotional roller coaster of her own making. Her financial struggles had nothing to do with her intellect and everything to do with her emotional volatility. The turning point arrived when Valerie began treating her emotional impulses not as absolute truths, but as biological weather patterns. She realized that feeling fear during a market downturn is an automatic evolutionary reflex, but acting on that fear is a choice. She implemented a simple behavioral circuit breaker. Whenever an unexpected financial shock or market fluctuation triggered a spike of anxiety, she instituted a mandatory 48-hour waiting period before taking any action. During those 2 days, she was forbidden from logging into her brokerage accounts or making portfolio adjustments. Instead, she journaled about her fears and reviewed her long-term investment philosophy. That simple pause broke the feedback loop between her amygdala and her checkbook. Within a few years, Valerie stopped reacting to short-term market noise and started leaning into the quiet power of emotional steadiness. Her net worth finally began to mirror her high intelligence. Why is emotional mastery so difficult when it comes to money? Neuroscience shows us that financial losses trigger the exact same neural pathways in the brain as physical pain. When you lose money, your brain doesn't just register a mathematical decrease, it hurts. Behavioral economists call this asymmetry loss aversion. Human beings feel the psychological pain of losing $1 roughly twice as intensely as they feel the joy of making one. This evolutionary quirk makes us naturally prone to short-sighted panic. When left unmanaged, fear drives us to hoard when we should invest or sell when we should hold. Conversely, greed makes us blind to risk during speculative bubbles, convincing us that exponential growth will last forever. Developing emotional habits of financial freedom requires building what psychologists call effective resilience, the capacity to remain calm, centered, and strategic when your environment is screaming at you to panic. How do you cultivate this resilience in everyday life? First, separate your self-worth from your net worth. When your identity is tethered to the daily fluctuations of your bank account, every market dip feels like a personal rejection, and every financial win feels like a temporary reprieve from inadequacy. True financial freedom begins when you realize that your inherent value as a human being remains entirely untouched by economic weather. Second, build friction into your high-stakes decisions. Never make a major financial move when you are emotionally flooded, whether you are feeling euphoric after a win or terrified after a loss. Give your prefrontal cortex time to come back online by stepping away, breathing slowly, and consulting your long-term roadmap. When you master your emotional responses to money, you stop being a victim of circumstance. The market can roar or crash, unexpected expenses can appear, and economic cycles can shift, but you remain anchored. Wealth flows naturally to those who can maintain a cool head while everyone else is losing theirs. Prosperity reflection. Think back to your most recent financial regret, an impulsive purchase, a panic-driven sale, or a decision made out of anxiety. What specific emotion, fear, greed, boredom, insecurity, was driving your choice at that moment? Write down a personal, circuit breaker, rule you can use the next time that specific emotion threatens your financial clarity. Chapter Summary. Financial freedom is primarily a test of emotional regulation rather than pure mathematical or intellectual genius. Money triggers primal survival circuits, making emotional volatility one of the greatest hidden threats to long-term wealth accumulation. Loss aversion causes human beings to feel the pain of financial loss twice as intensely as the joy of equivalent gains, driving panic. Implementing a mandatory waiting period or circuit breaker helps prevent emotional reactions from overriding long-term strategy. Separating your self-worth from your net worth and building effective resilience allows you to navigate economic turbulence with unshakable confidence. Chapter 9: Why most people stay busy instead of becoming wealthy. We have all met someone who is perpetually rushed, exhausted, and wearing their burnout like a badge of honor. They run from meeting to meeting, answer emails at midnight, juggle 3 side hustles, and complain endlessly about having not a single free minute in their day, yet their financial position never seems to budge. They confuse frantic motion with meaningful progress, mistaking sheer exhaustion for wealth creation. This relentless cycle exposes a critical truth: being busy is often a socially acceptable form of laziness. It is much easier to stay frantically occupied with low-leverage tasks than it is to pause, think deeply, and focus on the few high-impact activities that actually move the needle toward prosperity. Traditional productivity culture teaches us to cram every waking hour with tasks, treating our time like a container to be filled to the brim. But true economic leverage operates on an entirely different frequency. Wealth is not created by how many hours you work, it is created by the strategic weight and leverage of what you choose to focus on. Consider Roland, a talented freelance web developer who worked 80 hours a week building basic websites for small local businesses. Roland was chronically sleep-deprived, constantly behind on his deadlines, and perpetually stressed about cash flow. Whenever a client asked for a minor tweak, Roland dropped everything to fix it himself. He wore every hat in his business: salesperson, coder, accountant, and customer support, convinced that working harder was the only path to survival. One evening, staring blankly at a monitor at 2 in the morning while trying to fix a broken contact form for a client paying $50, Roland hit a wall of exhaustion. He realized he was trading his physical health and sanity for pennies. He was trapped in the trap of active labor, where every dollar earned required a direct sacrifice of his finite time. The turning point came when Roland took a radical step. He shut down his computer for an entire weekend and audited his workload. He realized that 80% of his frantic daily activity was generating only 20% of his revenue, while a handful of high-level architectural projects accounted for the vast majority of his financial success. Roland stopped taking low-paying custom gigs. He packaged his core web development framework into a standardized, scalable digital product, hired a virtual assistant to handle routine customer support, and dedicated his newfound mental bandwidth to advising enterprise clients on digital architecture. Within 2 years, Roland cut his working hours in half while tripling his income. Roland didn't get richer by working harder, he got richer by trading frantic motion for strategic leverage. Why do so many people default to endless busyness? Behavioral psychologists call this activity bias. Our brains love the immediate dopamine hit of crossing trivial tasks off a to-do list. Answering 50 emails, organizing digital folders, or rearranging your desk makes you feel productive because you are expending energy. But it is safe energy. It shields you from the vulnerability of tackling high-stakes, ambiguous problems that require real creative depth. Such as negotiating a major contract, redesigning your business model, or learning a high-leverage skill. Scarcity thinking whispers that if you stop moving for even a second, everything will collapse. It convinces you that you must personally oversee every minor detail to ensure survival. Wealth building requires shifting your mindset from input to output, from labor to leverage. Leverage comes in four primary forms: labor, capital, code, and media. When you rely solely on your own physical labor, your income is permanently capped by the number of hours in a day. When you leverage technology, systems, capital, or specialized knowledge, you decouple your income from your time. How do you break free from the trap of busyness? Start by ruthlessly auditing your daily activities. Ask yourself, if I could only do one task today that would genuinely move my life or business forward, what would it be? Give that task your absolute best cognitive energy, and ruthlessly eliminate, delegate, or automate the rest. Stop wearing your exhaustion as proof of your worth. The market does not reward you for how tired you are at the end of the day, it rewards you for the leverage and scale of the solutions you provide. When you step off the treadmill of frantic busyness and into the quiet power of strategic focus, you create the space for true abundance to enter. Prosperity reflection. Review your schedule and task list for the past week. What percentage of your time was spent on low-leverage, reactive busyness versus high-leverage value creation? Write down one time-consuming task you can delegate, automate, or eliminate starting tomorrow to free up mental bandwidth. Chapter Summary. Frantic busyness is often a socially acceptable form of procrastination that shields people from high-stakes, strategic thinking. Activity bias gives the brain a false sense of accomplishment through trivial tasks while avoiding real creative problem-solving. Wealth is not a function of hours worked, but of the leverage and scale of the solutions you deploy. Decoupling your income from your personal time requires shifting toward systems, technology, capital, or specialized knowledge. Auditing your daily activities and eliminating low-leverage busyness opens the mental space required for true prosperity. Chapter 10, The Power of Decisions Compounded Over Time. We have all met someone who looks back at their financial life with deep regret, convinced that a single catastrophic mistake or a missed opportunity decades ago ruined their chances at prosperity. They fixate on that one defining moment, believing their entire financial destiny was sealed by a single roll of the dice. This perspective misunderstands how long-term wealth is actually constructed. Fortunes are rarely built or destroyed by monolithic, life-altering decisions. Instead, they are the quiet, cumulative byproduct of thousands of microscopic choices made silently in the ordinary moments of everyday life. Just as a snowball rolling down a snow-covered hill gathers mass slowly at first before becoming an unstoppable avalanche, your financial reality is the compounding result of daily behavioral interest. Consider Warren and Julian, two colleagues who started their careers at the same engineering firm on the exact same salary. Warren viewed financial decisions through the lens of immediate gratification. Every time he received a small bonus or a pay raise, he upgraded his lifestyle, leasing a newer car, dining at expensive restaurants, and financing luxury vacations. Each individual choice felt harmless on its own. After all, he reasoned, he worked hard and deserved to enjoy his life today. Julian, on the other hand, viewed every financial choice as a vote for his future self. He lived slightly below his means, consistently routing a fixed portion of his income into productive, cash-flowing assets. He didn't make flashy investments or chase get-rich-quick schemes. He simply made the quiet, disciplined choice to save and invest every single month, regardless of whether he felt inspired to do so. 10 years later, Warren and Julian were earning significantly higher salaries, but their financial realities were worlds apart. Warren was trapped on a high-income treadmill, suffocated by lifestyle creep and monthly debt payments, while Julian had quietly crossed the threshold of financial independence. Neither man made a single decision that created this divergence overnight. Julian simply understood the mathematics of compounding time. Why is the human brain so terrible at grasping the power of compound choices? Behavioral psychologists point to our evolutionary wiring for immediate feedback. For primitive humans, immediate outcomes mattered most. Eating the available fruit today kept you alive today, worrying about 10 years from now was an evolutionary luxury. As a result, our brains naturally discount future rewards while overvaluing immediate comfort. When you make a poor financial choice today, buying something you don't need on credit, skipping your savings contribution, or ignoring an investment opportunity, the negative consequence is almost imperceptible. Your bank account doesn't crash, and your life doesn't fall apart. Because the penalty is delayed, your brain assumes there is no penalty at all. Conversely, when you make a disciplined financial choice today, the positive reward is also invisible. Putting $50 into an investment account doesn't buy you a yacht tomorrow. It feels utterly insignificant. This invisibility trap tricks people into thinking that small choices don't matter. But compound interest applies just as relentlessly to your habits as it does to your capital. Small, positive financial choices repeated consistently over a decade produce exponential results. Small, undisciplined choices repeated over the same decade produce compounding debt, stress, and limitation. Transforming your financial future does not require superhuman discipline or a miraculous financial windfall. It requires upgrading the quality of your daily microdecisions. Stop waiting for a massive, dramatic moment to change your financial life. Focus entirely on the next decision in front of you. Ask yourself, does this choice compound in favor of my future freedom, or does it add friction to my future burden? When you respect the quiet compounding power of everyday choices, time stops being an enemy that runs out and becomes an extraordinary ally that multiplies your efforts beyond imagination. Prosperity reflection. Examine your daily spending and saving habits over the past month. Identify one small, recurring financial choice that currently works against your long-term freedom, e.g., subscription bloat, impulsive convenience spending, or neglected savings. Write down a replacement habit you can commit to for the next 30 days to let compounding work in your favor. Chapter Summary. Fortunes are rarely built or destroyed by single, monumental decisions, they are the cumulative result of thousands of microchoices. Behavioral wiring makes humans prone to discounting future rewards and underestimating the impact of small, daily habits. Lifestyle creep traps high earners on a treadmill of consumption, while consistent, modest investments build quiet financial independence over time. The invisibility trap tricks people into thinking small choices don't matter because immediate consequences are imperceptible. Respecting the mathematics of behavioral compounding. Chapter 11, Money expands who you already are. We have all met someone who secretly believes that money possesses some kind of mystical moral alchemy, that accumulating wealth magically turns a kind person into a philanthropist, or that holding on to cash corrupts an otherwise pure soul. We hear people argue that money is the root of all evil, or conversely, that more zeros in a bank account automatically guarantee a happier, more enlightened existence. Both extremes miss the fundamental psychological reality of what money actually is. Money is not a moral agent. It does not have an independent conscience, an ethical compass, or a political agenda. Money is an amplifier. It is a high-gain behavioral microphone that broadcasts your underlying character to the world with absolute clarity. If you are generous, kind, and community-minded when you have very little, money will simply give you a larger megaphone to fund education, support your family, and solve meaningful problems. But if you are insecure, dishonest, or driven by scarcity and fear when you are broke, millions of dollars will only magnify those exact traits, wrapping your insecurities in silk and accelerating your self-destruction. Consider Kenneth and Darius, two childhood friends who both built successful technology startups and sold them for multi-million-dollar exits in the exact same year. Kenneth had spent his entire life driven by a deep sense of insecurity and a desperate need for external validation. When his windfall arrived, money became his weapon and his armor. He bought ostentatious properties he didn't use, surrounded himself with sycophants who praised his genius, and treated service staff with casual arrogance. Within 5 years, despite his massive fortune, Kenneth was emotionally isolated, entangled in endless legal disputes, and profoundly miserable. Money had magnified his internal emptiness into a public spectacle. Darius, on the other hand, had always lived with a quiet, grounded sense of purpose and a deep commitment to mentoring others. When his exit check cleared, he didn't alter his core values. He established a regional fund to support young educators, invested in sustainable agricultural technology, and continued sharing Sunday dinners with his family. Money gave Darius the freedom to double down on his generosity and expand his capacity to serve others. Neither man was changed by money, both men were simply revealed by it. Why do we cling so stubbornly to the myth that money changes people? Behavioral psychologists call this projection bias. We often project our own unacknowledged anxieties, desires, or judgments onto wealth itself, treating money as a separate entity that acts upon us, rather than a tool we wield. When people say, money ruins people, what they are usually observing is the painful unmasking of character flaws that were already present long before the bank balance grew. Scarcity thinking fosters a strange moral ambivalence toward wealth. On one hand, people crave financial security, on the other hand, they harbor a secret, guilt-ridden suspicion that wanting wealth makes them greedy. This internal contradiction creates chronic self-sabotage. If part of you believes that becoming wealthy will make you a bad person, your subconscious mind will ensure you never get rich, protecting your self-image at the expense of your prosperity. True financial maturity begins when you reconcile your relationship with your own character. You do not need to wait until you are a millionaire to practice the qualities of an abundant steward. Generosity is not a financial tier, it is an attitude of resourcefulness. If you cannot be generous with your time, your kindness, or your attention when you have $10 in your pocket, acquiring $10 million will only make you a wealthier miser. When you focus on cultivating integrity, emotional maturity, kindness, and purpose today, you prepare your internal foundation to handle the amplifier of wealth tomorrow. Money stops being a moral test or a source of existential anxiety. It becomes a clean, powerful instrument of expression, a reflection of a generous, capable spirit doing good work in the world. Prosperity reflection. Examine your hidden beliefs about the morality of wealth. Do you secretly associate having money with greed, selfishness, or moral compromise? Write down where that belief came from and contrast it with how you personally intend to use financial abundance to express your highest values. Chapter Summary. Money is not a moral agent with an independent conscience, it is an amplifier that broadcasts your underlying character. Wealth magnifies who you already are. Accelerating generosity if you are grounded, or amplifying insecurity and isolation if you are driven by fear. Projection bias causes people to project their own internal judgments and anxieties onto money itself, treating it as an actor rather than a tool. Internal contradictions regarding the morality of wealth create subconscious self-sabotage to protect self-image. Cultivating integrity, kindness, and purpose today prepares your character to handle the Chapter 12, Building Wealth That Outlives You. We have all met someone who accumulates wealth with the frantic intensity of a dragon guarding a pile of gold in a cave. They spend their entire lives hoarding assets, cutting every possible corner, and tightening every financial knot, only to leave behind a bitter family feud and an estate that disintegrates into chaos within a generation. We look at their legacy and realize that accumulating assets without a generational vision is merely an expensive exercise in temporary scorekeeping. This short-sighted cycle exposes a vital transition in the science of wealth. True prosperity is never designed to stop with you. Traditional financial planning often treats wealth as a finite race that ends the moment you draw your last breath. It asks, how much can I accumulate before I die? But the master builders of history operate with a completely different mental horizon. They ask, what systems, values, and enduring values can I build that will serve generations I will never meet? Consider two neighboring landowners, Victor and Samuel, who inherited large agricultural estates in the same fertile valley. Victor viewed his inheritance as his personal playground. He sold off parcels of timberland to fund sports cars, threw lavish parties, and treated the soil as a bank machine to be mined dry without ever reinvesting in its health. Whenever his children asked about the future of the estate, Victor waved them off, telling them to make their own fortunes. Within 15 years, Victor's land was eroded, his accounts were empty, and his family was fractured by lawsuits and resentment. Samuel, on the other hand, viewed himself as a temporary steward of a generational trust. He invested heavily in soil regeneration, planted orchards whose fruit he knew he would never harvest, and established a family governance charter focused on education, entrepreneurship, and shared responsibility. When Samuel passed away, he didn't just leave behind a bank balance. He left behind a thriving ecosystem, an educated family aligned around shared values, and a self-sustaining asset foundation that continued to grow for a century. Samuel understood what behavioral psychologists call legacy framing, the cognitive shift from consuming resources to cultivating enduring systems. Why do so many people struggle to look beyond their own lifetime when building wealth? Evolutionary psychology explains that our brains are wired for immediate survival and medium-term lineage protection. Thinking across decades or centuries feels abstract and neurologically distant. Scarcity thinking exacerbates this blindness, whispering that there is barely enough to get you through your own life, let alone enough to share with descendants or community institutions you will never witness. When you live strictly in the short term, money is treated as a personal shield. When you expand your horizon to generational wealth, money becomes an institutional bridge. Building wealth that outlives you requires three foundational pillars. First, you must build intellectual and emotional capital alongside financial capital. Leaving a massive financial inheritance to children or communities who have not been equipped with the emotional discipline, financial literacy, and identity of stewards is like handing the keys of a high-performance race car to a toddler. True generational wealth passes down the mindset of value creation before it passes down the portfolio. Second, you must build systems of stewardship rather than relying on personal control. Create trusts, family boards, or philanthropic vehicles that enshrine your core values into permanent operational frameworks. Third, you must redefine your relationship with time. Every great enterprise, whether a family legacy, a foundation, or a business empire, requires planting seeds in shade you will never sit under. When you shift your perspective from accumulation to stewardship, the entire emotional weight of wealth changes. You stop stressing over short-term market noise because your vision is anchored decades into the future. You realize that you are part of an ongoing chain of human ingenuity and care. Wealth stops being something you grip with white knuckles out of fear of dying broke, and becomes something you give to the future with open hands and profound purpose. Prosperity reflection. Imagine your financial life 50 years from now. If your descendants, partners, or community inherited only your current financial habits and mindset, not just your cash, but your daily choices, what would they receive? Write down 3 legacy shifts you want to make starting today to ensure you leave behind systems of abundance rather than cycles of scarcity. Chapter Summary. Accumulating assets without a generational vision or values framework often leads to estate chaos and family fracture. Generational wealth requires shifting from personal resource consumption to cultivating enduring systems of stewardship. Evolutionary wiring makes humans prone to short-term thinking, while scarcity views resources as too limited to share across generations. Passing down financial capital without first instilling emotional discipline and financial literacy is a recipe for asset destruction. True legacy building means planting seeds of value in shade. Chapter 13, The Prosperity Mindset in Everyday Life. We have all met someone who treats the concept of prosperity as if it belongs exclusively to a weekend seminar, a luxury vacation, or a high-stakes corporate board meeting. They separate their real life, filled with grocery lists, laundry, traffic jams, and household chores, from their grand financial ambitions, as though wealth were a costume worn only on special occasions. This compartmentalization reveals why so many people feel exhausted by their financial goals. They treat prosperity as a distant destination rather than a daily practice. The science of wealth teaches us that true abundance is not found in rare, dramatic milestones. It lives in the mundane, unglamorous fabric of ordinary Tuesday afternoons. How you handle a minor inconvenience, how you speak to a cashier, how you organize your desk, and how you approach a routine household chore are all micro-expressions of your financial psychology. Consider Maya, a talented freelance copywriter who spent years waiting for her big break. Maya dreamed of the day she would sign a 6-figure retainer, rent a corner office, and finally feel like a successful professional. In the meantime, she treated her day-to-day work with casual neglect. She missed minor deadlines, ignored client emails when she felt uninspired, left her workspace in a state of chaotic clutter, and complained about the tediousness of her current clients. Maya believed she was saving her best energy for her future wealth. In reality, she was training her nervous system for mediocrity. The turning point came when Maya read a profound observation about daily habits: how you do anything is how you do everything. Stung by the accuracy of the statement, Maya looked around her chaotic desk and realized her external environment was an exact mirror of her internal mindset. She decided to run an experiment. For 30 days, she treated every ordinary, mundane task with the absolute highest level of care, attention, and professional pride. She organized her files, responded to every minor client inquiry within an hour, and treated a $500 project with the exact same rigor she imagined bringing to a $50,000 contract. Within 6 months, her reputation for flawless reliability spread like wildfire across her industry. Her small clients began recommending her to major enterprises. Her income doubled not because she found a secret market hack, but because she elevated her everyday standards to match the identity of the person she wanted to become. Why is everyday consistency so difficult for the human brain to maintain? Behavioral psychologists point to our natural craving for novelty and drama. Our brains love the excitement of a new project, a fresh spreadsheet, or a bold financial goal because novelty triggers a dopamine rush. But maintaining a high standard of excellence during the repetitive, quiet middle phases of life requires metabolic discipline. Scarcity thinking whispers that ordinary moments don't matter, that you can slack off now because your real life hasn't started yet. Abundance thinking understands that every single interaction is a building block. Integrating a prosperity mindset into daily life requires anchoring abundance in 3 simple practices. First, treat your immediate environment as a temple of focus. Clean your workspace, organize your digital files, and honor your commitments, no matter how small. Second, practice radical gratitude without passivity. True gratitude is not just feeling thankful for what you have, it is acknowledging your current resources so clearly that you can deploy them with maximum leverage. Third, approach every daily transaction, whether paying a utility bill or buying groceries, with a mindset of exchange rather than loss. When you pay a bill, do not wince at the subtraction, consciously thank the infrastructure, electricity, or service that made your life comfortable. When you infuse your everyday life with the quiet dignity of a prosperity mindset, wealth stops being an elusive ghost you chase across a finish line. It becomes the natural atmosphere in which you live, breathe, and create value every single day. Prosperity reflection. Examine one mundane, daily routine you currently rush through or resent, such as cleaning your workspace, reviewing your weekly expenses, or replying to routine emails. Write down how you can elevate that specific task tomorrow by bringing an attitude of elite craftsmanship and care to it. Chapter Summary. Compartmentalizing financial goals from everyday life leads to exhaustion and delays true prosperity. How you handle ordinary, mundane tasks is a direct micro-expression of your internal financial psychology and standards. The axiom, how you do anything is how you do everything, dictates that sloppy daily habits sabotage long-term wealth creation. Escaping the novelty trap requires bringing metabolic discipline and high-level craftsmanship to the quiet middle phases of work. Treating everyday transactions and routines with gratitude and structure makes abundance your natural, permanent. Chapter 14, Living Above Fear, Comparison, and Lack. We have all met someone who appears to have successfully checked every conventional box of external success, a prestigious title, a luxury vehicle, a sprawling home, and a gleaming social media profile, yet they look exhausted, anxious, and deeply fragile. The moment a peer acquires something newer or shinier, their fragile peace shatters under a fresh wave of quiet desperation. They are running a desperate race on a treadmill that has no off switch. This exhausting spectacle highlights the ultimate psychological trap of wealth creation, living trapped in the twin prisons of fear and comparison. Traditional finance focuses obsessively on the numbers in your bank account, but behavioral economists know that your true financial well-being is determined by how well you manage your internal psychological baseline. If your sense of self-worth is tethered to what other people own, earn, or think of you, you can make $1 billion and still remain psychologically bankrupt. Consider Juliana, a rising tech executive who earned an elite salary and lived in a fashionable urban neighborhood. From the outside, her life looked like a masterclass in modern success. But behind closed doors, Juliana lived in a state of chronic financial anxiety. Every time a colleague posted about a luxury vacation, a new property investment, or a high-end promotion, Juliana felt an immediate, sickening drop in her stomach. Driven by silent panic, she constantly upgraded her lifestyle to keep pace with her peers, financing designer wardrobes and luxury cars she didn't genuinely enjoy. Despite earning more than 95% of the population, Juliana's savings account hovered near zero, and her stress levels were off the charts. She was trading her mental health to buy things she didn't want, to impress people she didn't even like. The turning point came when Juliana suffered a minor health scare that forced her to take a 2-week medical leave from work. Stripped of her corporate routine and social media feeds, she sat in absolute silence and asked herself a terrifying question: if no one else was watching, grading, or evaluating my life, what would I actually choose to do with my time and money? The answer stunned her. She didn't care about luxury cars or designer labels; those were merely expensive anesthetics she used to numb the pain of inadequacy. Juliana returned to work with a radically altered posture. She stopped tracking what her peers were buying, liquidated her flashy depreciating assets, and redirected her capital into building a quiet, secure portfolio and pursuing work she genuinely loved. For the first time in her adult life, she felt invincible. Why is the human brain so easily hijacked by comparison? Evolutionary psychology reveals that our ancestors lived in small tribal bands where social status meant literal survival. Being ostracized from the tribe or falling behind your peers meant danger. As a result, our brains developed an automatic, hardwired radar for social comparison. In the modern world, this ancient radar has been hijacked by a globalized media ecosystem. You no longer compare yourself to your immediate neighbors. You compare your behind-the-scenes reality to everyone else's carefully curated highlight reel. Scarcity thinking feeds directly on comparison, whispering that someone else's win diminishes your portion, and that your worth is measured by how flashier your lifestyle is than the person standing next to you. Living above fear, comparison, and lack requires building what behavioral scientists call psychological sovereignty. The uncompromising refusal to let external metrics dictate your internal peace. How do you anchor this sovereignty into your daily life? First, define your own explicit definition of enough. Until you articulate what enough looks like for your peace, freedom, and security, the goalposts will keep moving forever, trapping you on an infinite treadmill of more. Second, practice radical audit of your triggers. Notice which environments, social circles, or digital feeds instantly spark feelings of inadequacy or envy, and ruthlessly curate your attention away from them. When you step out of the arena of comparison, you reclaim your most precious economic asset, your cognitive bandwidth. You stop spending money to buy applause from strangers and start investing capital to buy freedom, time, and peace of mind for yourself. Wealth stops being a competitive sport where you measure your worth against the scoreboard of others. It becomes a deeply personal sanctuary of peace, purpose, and quiet power. Prosperity reflection. Write down your personal, unvarnished definition of financial enough, not what society expects, but what genuinely brings you deep peace, security, and creative freedom. Now, identify one area of your spending or lifestyle that is driven purely by comparison or the desire to impress others. What is one step you can take this week to release that burden? Chapter Summary. Tethering your self-worth to social comparison or external status creates chronic financial anxiety, regardless of how much you earn. Evolutionary wiring makes humans prone to tribal comparison, a tendency dangerously amplified by modern digital culture. Scarcity thinking fuels the illusion that someone else's financial win diminishes your own worth or potential. Achieving psychological sovereignty requires defining your personal threshold of enough to escape the endless treadmill of lifestyle creep. Reclaiming your cognitive bandwidth. Chapter 15, The Science Becomes Your Way of Life. We have all met someone who treats self-improvement and financial education like a crash diet. They dive in with explosive intensity for a few weeks, read every book on the shelf, optimize every spreadsheet, and preach their new philosophy to anyone who will listen, only to burn out, abandon the framework entirely, and slip right back into their old, comfortable habits. We watch their cyclical enthusiasm with gentle knowing, recognizing the familiar human tendency to treat growth as a temporary project rather than a permanent home. This final transition reveals the ultimate secret of the science of wealth. True prosperity is not a destination you arrive at, a certificate you frame, or a milestone you cross. It is an ongoing, lifelong way of living. Throughout this journey, we have dismantled the myths that keep people chained to scarcity. We have explored how wealth begins long before money arrives, rooted in the quiet soil of identity and self-concept. We have walked through the invisible worlds of scarcity and abundance, learning how to calm our nervous systems and pivot from survival panic to creative problem solving. We have examined how cognitive capital, emotional regulation, relentless execution, and extraordinary value creation combine to form a bulletproof economic engine. We have learned that money is not a moral judge or a mystical talisman, but an amplifier of who you already are. We have looked beyond our own lifetimes to see wealth as an institutional bridge and a generational trust. And we have discovered that true financial freedom is found not in the flashy applause of comparison, but in the quiet, sovereign peace of everyday consistency. Consider Leonard, the commercial real estate broker we met in Chapter 4, who lost everything during a market crash only to rebuild his life through cognitive capital. Years later, after his advisory firm had grown into an international enterprise, a younger entrepreneur asked him for the single greatest secret to his enduring success. The entrepreneur expected Leonard to share a brilliant stock tip, a macroeconomic prediction, or a complex tax strategy. Instead, Leonard smiled and pointed to his worn-out leather notebook. "The secret," Leonard said quietly, "is that I stopped trying to get rich and started focusing entirely on becoming a master of value, stewardship, and calm. Wealth didn't arrive because I finally figured out the market. The market finally rewarded me because I refused to stop growing." Leonard understood what the science of wealth ultimately teaches. When you align your identity with abundance, train your mind to solve valuable problems, regulate your emotions under pressure, and serve others with integrity, prosperity stops being an elusive ghost you chase across a finish line. It becomes your natural atmosphere. Why do so many people struggle to maintain this way of life over decades? Behavioral economists call this the maintenance paradox. Our brains are biologically wired to seek homeostasis, a state of rest where energy expenditure drops. Once people achieve a certain level of financial comfort, their primitive brain whispers that it is safe to coast, to stop learning, to stop serving with intensity, and to let the systems run on autopilot. But true wealth is an organic ecosystem. Just as a garden requires ongoing sunlight, water, and care to flourish, your financial and psychological abundance requires lifelong stewardship. Living the science of wealth as a permanent way of life rests upon 3 unbreakable commitments. First, remain a lifelong student of human behavior and value creation. The economic landscape will shift, technologies will evolve, and industries will transform, but the universal principles of human psychology, trust, and problem-solving remain eternally constant. Second, maintain an unyielding commitment to service. Whenever you feel your financial energy stagnation or your motivation wane, do not look inward and ask, "How can I make more money?" Look outward and ask, "Whose problem can I solve today with extraordinary excellence?" Third, hold your resources with open hands. Wealth that is hoarded out of fear becomes a prison, but wealth that is stewarded with purpose, generosity, and long-term vision becomes a liberating force for your family, your community, and your own soul. As you close this book and step back into the ordinary rhythm of your life, remember the transformation you have begun. You are no longer someone who waits for luck to knock on a closed door. You are an architect of value, a steward of abundance, and a master of your own financial destiny. The principles are clear. The science is proven. The path is open before you. Step forward, create extraordinary value, and let your abundance become a blessing to the world. Prosperity Reflection. Look back across all the reflections and insights you have gathered throughout this audiobook. Write down your personal manifesto for the next decade of your financial life, 3 non-negotiable principles you commit to living by, regardless of economic weather, market noise, or external circumstances. Read your manifesto aloud as a solemn promise to your future self. Chapter Summary. True prosperity is not a temporary project or a final destination, but an ongoing, lifelong way of living. Wealth is an organic ecosystem requiring continuous stewardship, learning, and care rather than passive coasting. Shifting your focus from getting rich to mastering value creation and service aligns your life with permanent abundance. The universal principles of human psychology, trust, and problem-solving remain eternally constant amidst changing economic landscapes. Holding your resources with open hands and living with sovereign purpose turns wealth into a liberating force for yourself and the world.